All right, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to the City of Evans work session for January 19th. The first item on the agenda is the COVID-19 response. We'll hear from staff.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, members of the council. Our update tonight follows our similar format with updates on all of our data. If I can make the clicker. There we go. This is our Weld County new cases per week trend. You can see that over the last few weeks, it's been a lot of more variation than we had over the last few. But this time, this week, it's been in a good direction in terms of the county's overall efforts. You can see that at this point, our cases per week are at the level of approximately mid-October, which again is heading in the right direction. Just for contrast, this is the statewide trend for new cases per week. You can see that similarly the county or the state did have an uptrend for a week ago from the week prior, but also the state is on that downward trend in terms of new cases. This comes back to Weld County, and this is our total new cases with additionally the fatalities numbers along the bottom there. More trends. I'll speak to the other the fatalities trend in just a moment. This one shows us the solid blue line is the fatalities chart. You can see that number is approaching 200 for Weld County. You can see this superimposes the hospitalization. As we've talked, this is one of those stats where I think the rubber meets the road in terms of what we're trying to improve when it comes to hospitalizations and, of course, fatalities. This shows that hospitalizations are also down, but that solid blue line and the uptick that we're seeing over the past few years probably follows the strong spike from the weeks prior, unfortunately, where hospitalizations were so far up. So hopefully we'll see that fatalities line start to level off. This slide just shows where we are, where Weld County is, as far as the states, the CDPHE status dial goes. These metrics are all trending in actually the right way for us. These are the first one, positivity rates. You can see that we're currently in that, what we call here the level 3 or orange rate there, or band. And you can see that the positivity rates, we want that to be certainly less than 15% of new cases, and get that down toward 10, down toward 5, and we're actually at 8 for the current week, which is certainly continuing the downward trend that we've been seeing over the past couple months, which is good. Cases per 100,000 past 2 weeks. This number is also trending down. For Evans, we want that category 3 there, 350 per 100,000. That's approximately 1,150 for Weld County. So we're starting to get back down toward those target metrics. And then new hospital admissions per day. The goal there for the state is for us to be stable or declining, and that turns out that we are. You can see several, probably 6 weeks ago, we were around 10 on average, 10 per day, and for the last 6 weeks we've been closer to, or 4 weeks, 1 per day, which is of course stable. So overall, that's a positive trend for us. Those are those various levels, currently in level orange. And our operational update, this hasn't changed much since the last update. Our goals for the city remain to keep our essential cities operational, keep this building running, and to support our local businesses, help them to stay open. I will let you know that we also haven't had any final answer from the state on our 5-star application. We, as council's aware, we went in together with the city of Greeley to apply for this option. This would be an optional program for our businesses in order to get them some more confidence to be open. Haven't heard the final there, and we hope that we do get the final answer, hopefully approval this week, so that the businesses who choose to can start to move down that path to getting more open. And as far as the house, I won't read each of those bullets, but short story is that our city services are nearly fully operational. The only ones that are still significantly impacted are really the recreation services and some of those programs. But we do have activity here in this building for recreation, and all of our other services are continuing. I will mention that this week so far we do have one employee out with a confirmed COVID test, but last week we had several days where we had 0 employees out for either positive COVID tests or COVID symptoms. So that was a really good feeling for us and for our staff. So so far we are doing our best to stay safe. That concludes my remarks, Mayor. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Questions of staff on COVID?
Have none.
Thank you, Jim. Next item on the agenda is retail trends, and we'll hear back from you, Jim, and Alice. Katie.
Thank you, Mayor. So tonight is the first step in the process that we outlined. We got some feedback from council on several weeks ago in terms of our broader economic development strategies and master planning that we're doing. I am thankful, and I will recognize there's a couple of our planning commissioners here to learn about retail with us as they're engaged in that work as well. Tonight we have part one of our kind of background context for council on retail. Retail's a really critical component for us and one of our goals that we've had for some time. And our goal tonight will be we have a general presentation on retail trends, what's happening in kind of the world of retail, especially with regard to the effects of COVID. But really an update just on what's happening out there in the various retail subsectors. So our hope tonight is that we can all kind of, gain a little more background here, some of the same background, and then in 2 weeks, our consultants, who will introduce in just a moment, will come back and we'll look at more Evans-specific locations where we'll be able to kind of talk about what's most likely to develop and why, and strengths and challenges that we have with very specific locations within Evans. So tonight the goal is context, background, general questions. I know Katie is really hoping that we'll have questions and that we'll have some kind of free-flowing conversation after she has some background to present. I'll start the introduction of our retail consultant, Katie Press, just by reminding council. Some of you may remember Katie. Katie helped us and had a work session with council, a couple of them in 2017, as council was talking about the potential for development at the Evans Redevelopment Agency sites, both the Randy's Diner site and the Eshes Market site, as we know them informally. And at that time, Katie gave she did some analysis, talked to developers of large grocery retail chains and some other retailers about strengths and challenges of those properties on Highway 85 She had some advice for the council at that point that turned us, toward a broader focus on our Highway 85 corridor and kind of helped us start on some visioning for the corridor that would create kind of that environment that would be desirable for retailers to invest in. And that we've been doing that, I think council's aware, with the visioning and also our redevelopment work since then. Katie also, at that time, during 2017, conducted a pretty extensive evaluation of our 37th Street corridor, primarily. There were a couple other locations, and she looked at each of those sites and came back with a report for council on kind of what's most ready for development, and has helped us to focus those efforts. So with that, I would like to ask Allison, who's been working very closely with Katie, for Allison to give a little broader professional introduction for Katie, and then we'll ask her to give us her presentation.
Yep. Well, even though I've done a fair amount of retail work in my capacity as an economic developer in the past, working with Katie, she's got 30 plus years of experience working in retail development, both as a retailer, but also as on the retail development side. I think we're fortunate to have her as a successful retail consultant, and her networks and her connections and just her knowledge of the industry overall. I have found that to be very helpful as I've gotten to know more about the Colorado market specifically. But yes, with 30 years of retail real estate behind her, Katie has been worked as a vice president of development for Catellus Commercial Group, and she initiated a retail development arm of that California company. But more importantly, she started out with 7-Eleven stores in 1984, placing stores throughout Colorado, but then joined Safeway in the 1990s as their real estate manager. And she really, I think, helped them pioneer what she called the self-development program throughout the Colorado region, that led to the development of more than 20 retail, Safeway-anchored retail shopping centers. So I think just that knowledge of how those shopping centers develop and how they, how all those tenants sort of work together, I think is important for us. So I think Katie will tell you that she's selective about the municipal clients that she takes on. And so in addition to us here at Evans, she works with Windsor, Arvada, Broomfield, Centennial, Superior, Commerce City, and Thornton are some of her other municipal clients. So I think we're fortunate to have her connections, and I always enjoy my conversations with Katie. So I'm looking forward to your comments tonight, and I'll turn it over to you to play.
Okay. Get set up here. Okay. Well, after those introductions, gosh, I don't know. I'm probably blushing. Okay, so I am Katie Press. There's a number. I've spoken in front of you before, and I think I see some new faces about, although these are my reading glasses, not my distance glasses. I am been in the retailing industry here in Colorado for over 35 years. I'm in my early 60s, in case you all are wondering. This is gray. It's not colored. I think one of the most important distinctions about me as a consultant is I'm a practitioner. I'm not an academic. There's a lot of guys out in the industry who do retail consulting of sorts, and the majority of them are, I would say all of them, are academics, meaning they've never had the CEO of their company sitting in the front seat of their car driving real estate and understanding how to make real estate decisions for a retailer. They've not been negotiated land deals, run development performers, entitled projects through municipalities. And there's a real distinction of that in terms of understanding retailing. My education as it pertains to retailing has been born through all of that experience, as well as my accessibility to the deeper recesses of the retailing community. And even in all the time I've been doing this, when I get on the phone with a retailer, it's an exchange of information and ideas, and they have as much to share with me as I do in terms of my opinions. And I really think that's a really valuable asset as we look at assessing and understanding retail capacity and opportunities in a municipality. And that's the difference between being a practitioner and an academic. That unique background of having been both a retailer and a developer puts me in a really interesting position, and it was one of the reasons I became a consultant. I was really encouraged by folks on both sides of the table, both of those entities, to say, hey, there's nobody out there who really understands both sides as in depth as you do and can help to try and share that. My career really started obviously on the private sector side, and for many years of my consulting remained on the private sector side, and I was reached out to by what we call the Grand Dame of Economic Development. That was Hazel Hartbarger at that time, and wanted to have a more relevant conversation within a municipality about how to do retail. What does retail economic development look like? How do we become a partner? I equated it back then to a bit to like letting the fox into the hen house, but we had things to learn from each other, and I honestly believe I'm a better private sector consultant for my work with municipalities, and I'm a better municipal consultant because of my work with the private sector. It gives me a depth of knowledge that very few people actually carry around, and working on both sides to help both sides understand and meet together at opportunities. Generally, I understand why retailers make certain decisions, and that's a really key component. You'll see as we get into more and more conversation and we talk more in depth, there's sometimes when I'm just going to say they're not going to do that. It's not that I'm like trying to shut a conversation down. It's just that I know they're not going to do that, and that's a perspective I think that's valuable to a municipality, because the worst thing we can do is waste time. If we can't accomplish something, if it's not going to happen, it's better to move on and really focus in on the things that we can accomplish. And then the ability to try and extend that knowledge. That's a skill I've had to learn. Private sector doesn't talk like the public sector. We swear a whole lot more, for one thing, and we're very bottom line oriented. And because we live it and eat it and drink it every day, it's intrinsic to us. It's not something we have to explain to each other. Learning and adapting and trying to be a good communicator on the municipal level to help you understand how the private sector is thinking is a skill I still work at every day, so sometimes I'm better at it than others. I've had to learn to slow down. I tend to talk really fast. So I'm like, slow down and try and get the concepts and the ideas out there so that you can learn what I know, which is really the most valuable aspect. And that kind of translates into what our plan is. I asked Jim and Allison, I said, I don't want to come and just download a bunch of information to the council, and it's a bit like swallowing the apple whole. You're going to choke on all of that information. You're not going to retain a lot of the information, and I need you to be able to do that, because the more educated and knowledgeable you are, the better we are as partners with the private sector. So I wanted to start out really with a general informational perspective about retailing. Yeah, there's impacts from COVID, and as you saw, I put COVID updates into that Insider's, I call it a tutorial for whatever you want to call it. But, a lot of things that are going on in retail are really not systemic from COVID or from the pandemic. They're factors that were there prior to the pandemic. So I wanted to be able to spend some time with you this evening and really talk about retail in a generic format, really what drives it, what the trade area criteria is based on the scale and sector of retailing, so that we can start to build that basis of knowledge and understanding as it pertains to retailing. That makes us all better as we go out and look at different retailing opportunities. The next meeting that we're going to do, we're going to take a deeper dive and really look at how this information we're talking about today and that you have in your packets from last week, how that relates to the city of Evans. And so I wanted to break this up and let you guys spend some time with that document, read it, kind of digest it, and understand it in a way that helps the next part of our discussion make some sense. So as an introduction to where we're at with retailing, oops, I guess I got to start moving these along, huh? That would help. There's the plan. Okay, so I like this picture. I actually have, I think in the tutorial, you have a picture of a 2-year-old with crackers in his mouth screaming and crying. That's retail. I could not find a better, I call her a crazy girlfriend, but I was told that that's not an appropriate term. So I've taken that out of my written materials. And really this kind of picture of everybody running around and throwing their hands up in the air and throwing papers everywhere, that's retail. That's really where we're at. We've had major shifts in consumer behavior, which has caused significant disruptions. And those, I want to be really clear, those disruptions were there before we began last year. Those disruptions were there in February. They were maybe a little less obvious and a little less prevalent, or not, just not as deep. But they were there. We were already shifting the way that we were acquiring goods, what goods we thought were worth acquiring. And when I say that, as consumers, we're just not as, I wouldn't say as materialistic as we probably once were. We're a little more comfortable having less shoes, less pairs of pants, maybe, our decorating style is a little bit different. I mean, we weren't consuming necessarily in the same manner as we had been like prior to the recession of 2008. Those confusing shopping patterns have really stymied retailers. Retailers rely on a predictive customer. That's how they assess what works in their stores, what doesn't work in their stores, how many people they need to serve those stores, how big, how small. Every major decision that retailers make about their particular business is based off of a consumer data point that is predictive. And when we don't act in a predictive manner, which we have not for several years now, that really stymies retailers. Because they're like, well, when does that shift in pattern and thought process end, and I can predict what you're going to do again? It's really put bricks and mortar under fire from online retailing. I mean, we've talked about that in 2017. I think the most interesting statistic that's coming out of the pandemic is the fact that what we thought would probably in the retailing community, which we always seem to be flat-footed when it comes to talking about online retailing, we thought it would take 5, maybe 7 years for things to kind of shake out, for consumers to catch up, get comfortable with what they acquire online and what frequency they do it. Most prognosticators are estimating that we've now sped that up to today. That what we thought was going to take to have major impacts 5 years from now, we now, because of the pandemic, have accelerated our shopping patterns. Retail's erratic, overly dramatic, and many times difficult to deal with. There's that crazy girlfriend thing. That's for everybody in our industry. I mean, the retailers will tell you they're that way. The developers of retailers will tell you that way. The owners of shopping centers will tell you they're that way. And that's an important thing to note because it's hard to be effective in a chaotic industry. And that's where we find ourselves today. As consumers, we're not buying the same thing from the same place with the same frequency. Imagine trying to serve us. It's difficult. So this inside look at retail was developed to provide a better understanding of retail and to talk about some of those things. Even though we are chaotic and messy and dramatic and cranky sometimes, there are aspects of retailing that aren't going to change. A good site 5 years ago is still a good site today and will still be a good site 5 years from now. The manifestation of that site and how it looks in terms of development and what that development makeup is may be different. Would have had a different answer maybe 5 years ago, maybe have a different answer today, could have a different answer 5 years from now. But the fundamentals of that site are still consistent. And that's why when we talk about characteristics within this tutorial, if you focus on anything, focus on those blue boxes. because those don't change. When we talk about how many people it needs and what a trade area dynamic is and what competitive influences may impact those factors have not changed. The layout of the shopping center and the makeup of it and who the users are, that may change. But the fundamentals of what makes a good grocery site, what makes a good department store site, that's a bad example. But the fundamentals of what makes a good grocery store site haven't changed. It's just, what does that look like when it manifests itself? So one of the reasons that this is important, we can't be successful as a retail economic development program without partnering with the retail community. This really is a close alliance. This is not something where we wish and hope and pray and put a pretty brochure together and we get a retailer. It doesn't work that way. You have to have close alliances with the folks within your community. It starts at the land level, who owns a piece of land, and the ability to develop it, to working with the retailing community and the developer community. The better that partnership is, the better the result. And what we look for in the private sector is we're looking for strategic partners. That means they want to work with municipalities who get it. They don't want to work with municipalities who are difficult, capricious. I hear that all the time. I get a lot of calls about that one. Do you know what Broomfield just did? I get that a lot. They want to work with somebody who's kind of predictable, it can be strategic with them, and can be a partner with them. And that's why we spend the time to become educated about retail. That's why I spend a lot of time with Allison and with Jim to help them understand the realities, because when we're out there talking to the private sector, I've heard that over and over again from the guys who are working with us on Highway 85. Oh my gosh, it's such a pleasure to work with Evans. I mean, it seems like they get it. They're willing to listen. They're willing to engage. That's a really important component, because without that, they would not have come up here. And so I can't stress with you how important that information I just gave you with, and if you haven't had time to read it, stick it in your bathroom and maybe read it a little bit at a time, but if you can spend time with it and get familiar with it, it makes a difference for us who are out there trying to work with the private sector. So some basic things to think about. So, and I find I do this slide because I've had a lot of interaction with elected officials and with senior staff level people who don't think they need to know this. How's that? You know, listen, everyone shops. All of us shop. We all have a personal opinion about retailers, but that doesn't make us a retail expert. There are people in our industry that are experts, and because we are shoppers, I hear this in my personal life all the time. Sometimes I just have to close my mouth and have another drink. But, you know, as they're sitting there telling me about what King Soopers is going to do, and I know intimately what King Soopers is going to do. So the fact that we are shoppers does not make us retail experts. You have to put aside preconceived beliefs based on our own personal habits. You may do things that the general public does or that enough people do, but you may do something, you may shop in a certain way that you don't. There are always outliers to every component. And so we can't take our own personal shopping, myself included, and extrapolate that out to how the industry is going to perceive a consumer. Retail site selection is comprised of many, many factors, lots of them. And each factor is important. You can't dismiss one and say, well, that doesn't matter. That's not something they respond to. And when making decisions on a potential market or sites. The more we understand what those factors are, the more we're able to assess and present viable opportunities to appropriate retailing contact. I can't call, you know, Simon or Mace Rich and pitch a regional mall on Highway 85 corridor. I'm not going to get past very far with Scott Nelson at Mace Rich. He's going to go, what are you thinking here, Katie? So the more we understand what an appropriate opportunity is and what's the best fit for those opportunities, the better our chances are at success. And so attaining actual knowledge about retailing is a primary tool. So you're hearing me harp on it. That's because I've had a number of councils just kind of dismiss it as something necessary. So I've gotten a little more strident in my messaging. Unrealistic expectations based on a lack of retailing knowledge is alienating to the retailing community. I can't tell you how many times I have had a retailer run into somebody or been pitched directly by somebody in a municipality that had unrealistic expectations, and they, the words are not kind. How's that? They just don't. We then become marked as somebody who doesn't get it, and we're working really hard to be that community that gets it. One of the most important components as we do retail economic development is that we need to have an effective toolbox. So we're going to get knowledgeable. We're going to know we're going to know our stuff, and then we're going to put together an effective toolbox. One of those is, when you're a community the size of Evans, is you got to have a good story. We have to have a story about who Evans is and what is unique about us and what are our opportunities. Right now, I'm just going to tell you flat out, we're thought of as the bedroom community to Greeley. Nobody's going to spend the time. There's no reason for them necessarily to spend the time to think of us any differently. We have to create those stories about Highway 85, about 37th Street, about what our growth potential is. What things do we have to help us stand out and be different from our neighbor to the north? And that's a really important component, because if you think about, and I addressed that in the tutorial, the real estate manager for King Soopers now is no longer local. For years and years, for decades, they were local. They're now out of Cincinnati. He actually has a territory that encompasses, I believe, most of the western half of the United States. When you're looking at real estate opportunities with that large of a geographical area, I guarantee you he doesn't know where Evans, Colorado is at. And so that's why it's our job to figure out that story and talk about it intelligently and knowledgeably, and then present it so that it gets on somebody's radar screen. It doesn't just get thrown in the wastebasket. We need to have flexible land use policies that allow for non-retail uses within zone properties, i.e. mixed use projects. There's a lot of conversation, and you saw that in the tutorial about, the future of retail is more than likely going towards a more mixed-use perspective. If you think about all the things you can potentially do online, what's that reason that gets you in the car and actually moves you to a place to go in person? And it's going to be, on some level, the environment of which that opportunity is encased in. And so, for years and years, I've been in this industry 35 years. I'm going to tell you, for 34 of it or 33 of it, we resisted every effort to be part of a mixed-use project. It was whatever we could do to not have to do that, we did. Now, all of a sudden, we're like, well, that could be our new best friend. So I would tell you, more and more retailers are starting to really look at what the makeup of what they're part of is. It's not just about building a shopping center anymore. We have to have land use policies that support that kind of fluidity, creativity, progressiveness. We have to be nimble enough as a municipality to seize on those opportunities. Taking an active role in the creation of public improvements. So if we're talking about space and we're talking about creating environments that people want to be in, we have a role. We're the kings of public improvements, right? Public spaces, and how do we do that? I guarantee you the retail development community will do what they have to do. They're going to have to change that perspective. But none of them are really as versed in placemaking and community type of elements as we are ourselves. We don't recognize how many things we actually do well as a municipality. Part of it is learning how to have mixtures of uses and how to enliven and embolden those areas in ways of public improvements to make them attractive. We have lessons to give the development community. And we shouldn't be shy about doing that, or even, requiring or asking for those things to be done. Embracing all elements of placemaking. There's no such thing of placemaking that should be considered bad. Everything should be on the table and should be open for conversation. And political support in making transitions and embracing those creative solutions. So that goes back to if you see something that's creative coming to the table, having the open mind about it, not shutting the door on it, and understanding that these are transitional questions and answers that need to happen within the retailing community. So that kind of leads into, how do retailers actually make location decisions? This always seems to be a bit of an enigma. It's not to us in the private sector, but I can understand from somebody outside, not fully understanding all of the criteria that goes in. Most people fail to understand that retailing is far more defined than consumers perceive. There's really a very extensive vetting process to any retail site. Any of you who own a business that is retail based, it's not just, flip a coin and say, well, that's a good economic deal. Many times good economic deals are not good sites. And so, we really have to look at all of the factors that are integral to that particular business about what makes a good site. And it's far more defined than anybody probably gives it credit. Retailers generally stay within the concept that best delivers their target customer to them. A lot of people think any retail can go anywhere. That's not true. Each sector of retailing, and that's how the tutorial is broken up, those are the groups of retailers that you're going to generally see within. There's always an outlier. Somebody can always throw something up to me that's outside the norm, and there's always an outlier. But generally speaking, grocery guys stay within the grocery concept of what a grocery site is. Home improvement stays within the same criteria of what they look for. And each retailer, no matter how big or small, have different criteria based on who they think their customer is. I can tell you for a fact, Starbucks' customer profile is different than Einstein's. So even though in theory you kind of look at them and you think they're all in the same, I'd ask the mayor, I'm going to guess Jersey Mike's is a little bit different than Jimmy John's. In terms of the criteria that you look at. So even though you have retailers within conceivably the same concept, they themselves may still have criteria that is separate from each other. So it's all unique. Each is unique. And part of what we have to do in the private sector, if you're working on the development side, is you have to recognize that uniqueness and understand how to blend those in a way that you can have something comprehensive. Real estate decisions are made from a national perspective, not localized. That was born out of the recession in 2007. Used to be, King Soopers division in Denver got, $200 million for a year, and that was what they used to either expand stores, remodel stores, or build new stores. That $200 million now is probably part of a national base, and they will prioritize their stores 1 through 20. None of those 20 could potentially not be in Colorado. So you're competing with the entire country, which is not how it used to be. Now you are competing across any market that retailer is in, and they will choose the best locations within all of the area they operate in. So, we can find the sites in Colorado that look attractive to us and something they should capitalize on, and gee, why aren't they? But they may have 20 other sites across the country that beat this one out. And, a few years ago, we had Home Depot come back to the market here in Colorado, and they hadn't built stores in a long time, still really haven't. And they came back and said, we're going to do 10 new stores nationally. And one of these could be here in your community. And we don't really need the money, but we want the money. And so if you'll give us $8 million as an incentive, I'm not joking, if you will give us $8 million as an incentive, we'll move you up outside of that 10, because right now you're about 15. We'll move you up to number 8 and you'll get the store. So, you kind of look crosswise at it and you go, well, that's not very good. And that's not something we want to do. But then you still have to sit down and say, well, if we can be one of the 10. And it turned out that municipality wasn't able to do that incentive in that format, and they did not get one of the Home Depots. So I tell that story because you can understand a little bit about, you can have the best site in the world. If you're not in that top priority, for whatever reason it is, it may not be that you get capitalized on now, or maybe it's 5 years from now or 3 years from now, or maybe it doesn't come at all. There's not an endless amount of capital for expansion, so they can't do all sites. There is that priority list that we talked about. They're limited with their expansion plans. I'd say that's even a bigger dynamic today, not because of the pandemic, but because many retailers are left wondering what does the future of their own business look like. Not in terms of viability, are you going to be here or not be here, but do I need a big store? Do I need a smaller store? Do I need to have a store that's more in the neighborhood? Do I need a store that's more regionally focused? Do I need to be selling this and this? Do I need to add this to this? So I would say as they continue to kind of stumble around in the chaos that we showed earlier, talked about earlier, trying to understand who we are as consumers and what's going to be the best representation of their store to us, you know, they have limited their expansion plans because you don't want to go out and build something that's not working. I think IKEA is a really good example of that. You know, they were on a fairly consistent expansion plan, including the opportunity to build a second store here in Colorado. Much prior to the pandemic, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, they really decided we don't know if our concept still works as it sits on the ground. Should we be smaller? Should we have more distribution as part of our stores? They're experimenting in Russia where they've taken their store and blown it apart and created a common area in the middle, and the living room areas here, and the house, you know, the kitchen goods are here, and you walk from outside to outside. You know, I can tell you that, you know, that's a retailer struggling to figure out what their next act is. That's why you don't go and build another store in Colorado, because you don't know conceptually what it is you should be doing. And so that's really limited expansion plans, and it's put most of the major retailers on the sidelines right now. So, you know, there's many factors unique to each retailer that go into the limitation on capital and limits of expansion. So it's not any one factor, it's a multitude of factors right now. And so it's important to understand that, you know, we can work our hardest and have the best opportunity, and it may mean we still can't land them. So the pandemic. So the major shifts in consumer behavior prior to the pandemic were already causing significant disruptions. We've talked about that. What has the pandemic done, though? It's accelerated those disruptions. So it's made them deeper, wider, and more challenging to bridge in many ways. Impacts that might have taken 3 to 5 years to shake out are now shaking out in 3 to 5 months. I mean, that's how impactful it's been. Not all impacts were bad to the overall health of retailing. There were some sectors that required a culling of the herd to better sustain long term. Restaurants definitely fit in this category. If you were reading between the lines a year and a half ago during the summer of 2019, there were articles starting to come forth saying we have too many concepts, we have too many restaurants per capita. It's not sustainable. You know, I used to joke, I'm like, gosh, we'd all have to eat hamburgers every night of the week to support every hamburger concept that was coming out. I mean, things were just coming hot and heavy. And so, you know, most of the industry experts within the restaurant industry were saying we were due for a culling of the herd. I think most people thought that would take 3 to 5 years to shake out. The pandemic shook that out in about a 3-month period. I would tell you where we stand today, though, is beyond the culling of the herd. You know, the cuts that are now coming into the restaurant industry by yet additional shutdowns in certain parts of the country have a more profound impact. Guys who probably would have made it may not now. And it's left that industry, I would think, it really in a state of it's hard to assess where we're going to be until we can get to the end, because we don't know. Does the new variant of the virus come around in March and we go into massive lockdowns again, and you know, dining can't regain its feet again? We're no longer at a point where we can fully assess where we might be. I would tell you in June and July and August, most guys in the restaurant industry felt like, okay, we're going to come back healthier and stronger at this point. We've kind of got rid of some dead weight, some dead concepts. There's some empty restaurant buildings coming available that maybe we could take advantage of. then November and December hit, and I can tell you most of those guys are not nearly as optimistic as they were before. So I think everybody's kind of going to hold their breath until the end of this is done. You know, if be it this, hopefully this summer or maybe the fall, and can really assess how we as consumers are going to come back to dining out. So I think it's the best example of, you know, where we kind of culled the herd. Pier 1 was due to go away, guys. That nobody in my industry was shocked by Pier 1 closing their doors. Nobody went, oh, you know, how could that happen? I mean, if you were reading the stuff about Pier 1, they were suffering under the tariffs that were coming out of China because most of their goods come from China. So, you know, there are some retailing that we're looking at going, you know, we kind of knew that was coming anyways. The pandemic just accelerated it. And I kind of jumped ahead of myself. I'm sorry. And we'll talk about restaurant trends. This was pre-pandemic, and this is what I was talking about. So 50% of consumers are eating out at least weekly. This is pre-last March, okay? Demand is stable but not rising. So all of a sudden we're flat. Casual dining has had a slight decline in sales, whereas pubs have seen moderate sales growth. So we were kind of changing what we wanted to do. You know, casual dining is Applebee's and those kind of guys. And some of those guys were, I would say, were victims of their concept. You know, kind of Old Chicago is probably a good example of that. They were kind of outdated, not really keeping pace with what, you know, we wanted to see. Strong rise in online ordering, resulting out of 3 out of 5 customers ordering delivery takeout at least once a week. That number is just blown out of the water now, right? And there had been, prior to the pandemic, and I did this on purpose because I think everybody thinks this is pandemic driven. There had already been an active opening and closure pattern with restaurants. Concepts were closing, new concepts taking their place, which really indicated the volatility in the restaurant industry. And consumer preferences were continuing to evolve. The divide between convenience and those looking for a memorable dining experience. So we could identify an industry that had come, I think, coming into 2019 seemed pretty strong, pretty interesting, right? We liked to spend money on restaurants. We were shifting some of our disposable money to eating out more often, especially millennials. I did read an interesting data point the other day that said millennials are now going, wow, if we don't eat out as much, we save more money. So, you know, how we return post-COVID is going to be interesting to, you know, maybe we all go crazy and we'll have the roaring 2022, but that remains to be seen. I think one of the more interesting things is there's a blurring of line of the concept. I mean, for a long time, restaurants fit into pretty succinct categories. And there's a blurring of that line to where we're getting to what's called a fine casual. So we're kind of blending, you know. We want to be a little more casual in our fine dining. We don't quite want to necessarily wear the suit. So we want to be a tad bit more casual, but we still want the food component that's associated with it. So we're starting to see concepts come forward that we're blurring that line. You know, the fact that fast casual restaurants were starting to place more emphasis on the dining experience, although Five Guys still haven't figured that one out. But, I mean, I don't need to eat a burger with music blaring, so I can't even talk to somebody across the table. Not that I get to do that anymore. But, you know, they're starting to understand that experience matters. And so, again, we're starting to see this blurring of the lines, you know. We're not fitting into very defined categories on the restaurant scene. You know, older, underperforming restaurants in all concepts will likely close to make way for newer concepts. Number of restaurants per capita seems to be high, indicating that a correction may be looming. Well, that happened. And then this would result in closure of slowed expansion in the fast casual dining segments. So it's important because I know there's a lot of dollars being committed to the restaurant industry. There's a lot of assistance out there all geared towards the restaurant industry. And, you know, I've counseled a number of my municipalities that I think that's all good, but, you know, you can't chase somebody that's got one foot in the grave, you know, and try and revive them necessarily. I'm more of a proponent of permanent improvements, like how do we get permanent dining patios? How do, not tents? How do we get permanent improvements in centers that, allow us to function in a restaurant environment that's maybe different than what we've done so far. So it's good to know, I think, as a municipality, that these were things that are already well underfoot before the pandemic. So let's talk about convenience retailing trends. Concept of convenience retailing is changing dramatically. Here we go again, right? It's changing. Once reserved for gas stations and fast food, the consumers of convenience now opening the door for new concepts in retailing. Quick serve restaurant dining explosions dramatically impacted the outdated concept. Even if you look at all of even the fast food kind of guys, they're all modifying their concepts. They're all trying to get better at it, create more of an experience, better aesthetics, better menus. Targeted towards younger generations whose primary concern is price, taste, ease of access. New food retailers are changing the convenience retail market. So that's important to know because, if we tend to think it's all was this. It's moving too. New look at convenience retail is more modern, broadly represented. That's a Dunkin' Donuts. Wouldn't that be fantastic? That's definitely a better representation than anything they've given us so far. With all of retail going through a transitional phase, some of the newer trends in convenience retailing are not necessarily sustainable. We're going to make some mistakes out there as we try things. Volatility in consumer spending, coupled with too many new retailers trying to enter the market, has a decided impact on the number and type of restaurant concepts that will continue to exist, especially within the convenience format. And a lot of trial and errors going on in the marketplace, especially in the dining arena. Convenience is something we should spend some time on because that's what we have showing up in Evans right now. And what we want to get out of it and what we want it to look like or the aspects that we want associated with it. Understanding the trends helps us understand what we should be asking out of it. Every municipality right now has stress coming to it from the convenience factor. I think there's 4 different gas guys running around right now. All of the feeders are running around right now. And it's important to think about them. A development with 6 freestanding pads on it is not where I think the future of retailing is. I think you can incorporate those users in a different way, provide different aesthetics and design to a project that makes them more of an amenity, and not allow them to just set up as 6 individual freestanding convenience retailers, with no relationship to each other and, a common drive being the only connective component. So as we see, you'll hear me talk more about this in the next 2 weeks as we talk about where there's opportunity here. And convenience retailing is going to be still a big conversation in Evans. It's really how do we execute it and what do we ask out of it. I'm going to spend quickly some time on grocery trends because really the other focus, I think, for the city of Evans that's in the near term would be grocery. If there's ever a chaotic element to retailing, it's grocery because it really is the cranky toddler. Online grocery is having a profound impact on the capacity of bricks and mortar retailing. That's kind of like a duh. All of us learned how to shop online during the pandemic, except my dad, who's 83 and doesn't have the internet. So I shopped for him online. Expectations are that online grocery retailing will continue to substantially increase, placing Amazon as a major competitor in the grocery mix. Amazon's an interesting conversation. They have their online presence. Within their own online presence, they're easily now the 3rd largest grocer in the country. I think we thought that would take them a few more years to get there. They're there. And they are setting up in the state of Colorado what we call last mile distribution because they're going to try and do it even more. They're going to try and get you groceries within an hour, within the same day. And since we've all become much better at shopping online and we're less concerned about what shows up on an online purchase. If you shopped Walmart and go pick it up at the curbside, you shopped online. So the fact that Amazon's going to get it to your door faster and maybe better, maybe not, remains to be seen. is a really impactful element to grocery. Because if you think about, we don't eat more food just because you have more options. And for every dollar you take out of the bricks and mortar grocery store arena is impactful to the entire grocery arena here in both in Greeley and within Evans. It impacts our ability to grow our bricks and mortar grocery presence, because there's so much volume now being done in what I call a ghost retailer. He's at every intersection on every site, right? Because he's in your home. So the other element to Amazon is the bricks and mortar version is coming too. It's here. It's here in Colorado. They're working on sites, 40,000 square foot grocery store, traditional, high tech, very, very high tech. You will not need to go through a checkout. You'll be able to just put items in your cart and then walk out the front door, which I'm starting to think would be a really good thing. If you've had to like self-check yourself lately, I'm like, yeah, I'd like to just walk out with my cart. You know, I mean, at 40,000 square feet, it's going to be interesting to see how they impact the marketplace, what they can really do. Are they going to be competitive? Do they know what it's like to compete against King Soopers, which is a very, very strong grocery competitor? All questions that are yet to be answered. You know, we still have Sprouts in the picture. Sprouts is, I think, going to look at what their model needs to be. I think there's a revamp of them coming. Natural Grocers, who plays on a much smaller level, but I mean, we have a lot of grocery. And I think what everybody misses in that equation is just how much volume Amazon's doing without a bricks and mortar store. Then you're going to throw the bricks and mortar onto the table, and it makes for a really interesting dynamic of who survives. Goodbye, Safeway. So Amazon's expected to enter the bricks and mortar world. That's coming. 43% of shoppers ordered groceries online in 2019. That's a little bit outdated. I don't really have new numbers for 2020. I'm sorry. You know, online grocery sales are projected to grow to $30 billion by 2021. I think that's been exceeded now. Online grocery sales are projected to reach 40% of total grocery purchases by 2025, and we're probably closer to that now. That equates to the equivalent of 3,000 bricks and mortar grocery stores that are on the ground today. So that means 3,000 stores need to go away. And that's a sobering number when you really start to think about it. And the siphoning of the food dollar to ghost retailers limits and reduces the need to expand bricks and mortar stores. So that's going to be germane to us as we go forward, because as we talk about whether the Ehrlich site can really support a grocery store and in what time period, these trends that have now been accelerated and pumped up, you know, are going to play into answering that question. You know, conventional food retailers, King Soopers, Safeway, Walmart, Neighborhood Market are all impacted by the entrance of new food retailing concepts. Once the only significant grocery option, these conventional grocers enjoyed holding the bulk of the available food dollar. That's not the case anymore. King Soopers especially is really working to understand how to best address factors of economy, alternative healthy trends. I don't think they're very far behind Amazon on the technology front. I think they're going to really try to be a significant player in that. I think they'd like to get to the point that you could just roll your cart out too. Still the most convenient grocery option though, because they're everywhere. They're proliferated everywhere. You know, their store networks are far more extensive than any new concept could come in. I mean, they're still going to be tough to beat because they have infrastructure. These grocers may be modifying their concept, but they all still desire to be neighborhood grocery option. Trade areas have not changed. We're still looking at 2-mile trade areas and the population bases within those 2 miles. And what about independent grocers? I don't know where the space exists for independent grocers anymore. I mean, there was a time when it was just Safeway, Albertsons, and King Soopers, and they still struggled when it was just them. And now you throw on Whole Foods, Sprouts, you know, the idea of an Amazon grocery store, bigger Kings, 123,000 square foot King Soopers. You know, if you're an independent, you're probably very specialized. and you're probably not very big, and you probably need a pretty big demographic to support you. And that's an interesting thing. I hope you caught that, in that the more interesting in your concept is, the more people you need to support it, which means your trade area grows. You need more people than a King Soopers who does a generic perspective of groceries. And that's talked about in the context of alternative versus traditional, and understanding that's an important component. The concept of an alternative food store is the most dynamic within the grocery industry. Whole Foods, Sprouts, Natural Grocers, Trader Joe's have all staked a claim in the Colorado marketplace. Consumers are evolving in their food sophistication. They care about sustainability, organics, farm to table. With no one retailer carrying the full gamut of products, consumers are shopping multiple stores. That's a real change. We didn't used to do that. If you're old enough like me, you remember you had your store. Now we kind of move ourselves around a little bit. Sometimes you might buy non-perishable, non-grocery items at Walmart because it's cheaper. So you buy paper towels and toilet paper and dish soap. But then you might go to Sprouts and buy your bananas and your meat because you like the representation that each of those retailers. One's price and value, one is quality. And so it just depends on what matters to you as a consumer, but we're no longer particularly loyal like we used to be. So that's kind of, I wanted to hit on a couple of the main things tonight. Certainly not a complete presentation of everything that was given to you, thank goodness, right? And so what's next from here? Where do we go from here? We're revisiting the site analysis that I did in 2017 that looked at particular sites and particular intersections as it pertained to retail. We're updating that. And expanding some conversation about some of those. We're going to key in on restaurant capacity and opportunity as it pertains to Evans. I know that's an area that you guys are very interested to understand about. As you can see from some of my comments earlier, we may not have a very good crystal ball with that, but it might be more about how do we continue to maintain opportunity, even if we're not in a position to capitalize. And then same is true on the grocery capacity and opportunity. And then we're going to key in on Highway 85 because I know there's conversation about what happens to Highway 85 and potentially the direction of retail on Highway 85. I will tell you as a precursor that my opinions from 2017 have not changed. It's not a retail corridor. Doesn't mean we're not going to have some aspects of retail on it, but in and of itself, it's not a retail corridor. And we'll revisit that rationale and some of the factors that are moving that, help bolster that or continue that opinion for me, and then why I think that. And I'm certainly open to debate it, but, I'm just going to give you a precursor that I'm not thinking that anything has changed on the 85 corridor that would precipitate a grocer coming in on the 85. And I have talked at length with that unnamed grocer that's now moving around the Colorado marketplace. And, we're not, Greeley and Evans, we're not in the mix at this point in time. And 85, I specifically talked to them about was not a match for what they're looking for. So that's it for me in terms of presentation. I saw a couple yawns, I apologize. So.
Thanks, Katie. It's a great presentation, as you always do. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I have a question for you. What really touched on me when you were talking about, everything that's going on is the story that Evans needs to tell. The issue I have is, I think, how does Evans, the population of 23,000 people, tell his story to get the retailers in here, to get that commercial growth in here, when you have a city like Greeley of 100,000 that's got mass development going on? How does Evans compete to say, hey, we're not the bedroom community of Greeley. We are Evans. We are here. We have a diverse population. We have great small businesses. We have, people from all walks of life that love the community, and we need to be heard. We're not just stepchild to Greeley. And also, how do we also tell that story? Because what I think is, Evans is getting closed in by Greeley. It's getting closed in by Milliken. It's getting closed in by Johnstown. And all of those areas are taking advantage of that. They're getting the retail. They're getting the development. And Evans, I feel, is getting stuck. where we got behind on the growth and getting that retail and getting that commercial aspect in here. They've taken advantage of that. And how do we tell our story to say, Evans should not be forgotten? We are here. We are a great diverse community. We can be your mecca for your development of your new concepts of these, multi-use, facilities, these multi-use retail facilities. How do we get that story out when we're overshadowed by everybody else that is building, exponentials?
I think that's a great question because, we have to create an identity for our opportunities, I think Highway 85 may not be predominantly retail, and actually some of the opportunities, if not maybe most of the opportunities in Evans, are not going to be predominantly retail. They are going to be maybe of a mixed use aspect of which retail is a part, but is not its sole use, right? And part of the story has to be, one, we have to continue to grow the residential. That's part of what we have to talk about. And then we have to talk about where our opportunities are and why those make sense. If you look at Johnstown, the only reason Johnstown won any kind of a retail roulette was because they have Highway 34 and I-25. Let's be real. They don't have anything else besides that. Greeley is your challenge. I don't think Milliken and Johnstown are a challenge. It's Greeley because, so much of the retailing focus is on 34. It just sits there, and we are in the shadow of that. And I don't think we can have the expectation that we're going to beat it or add to it because of those limitations that you just brought up. But that doesn't mean that we have no opportunity. It just means we have to be cognizant of what our opportunities are. We're going to be in that needs-based, community-based retailing arena, and then we've got to do the best format for it. I know there was a lot of pressure to try and develop Mr. Ehrlich's property away from retail, and Jim will tell you I fought him tooth and nail to not do that. So we've got to maintain opportunities where they're best suited, and then build the story around it. The story alone won't get you the deal, but it starts to put us on the radar screen, so at least know who we are and that we have growth aspects to this community, that we have additional development that's coming online that makes our market more interesting and makes us a possibility. The things that when I talk to people about Highway 85, that's probably one of the best highlights of this. They don't know that we're working on trying to change the perspective of Highway 85. That's an enigma to them. They're like, really? It's been that way for as long as any of us can remember. If we've been in the industry 20 or 30 years, it's not changed, right? It's really not changed. And there is a story to be told about Highway 85 because we are starting to make some strides and some changes to the corridor and some visioning to it. And that's a story that's not out there. It's not a story that's complete, for one. And two, it's not out there, and so I would say that there are certain pockets within the town right now that are potentially opportunities that aren't highlighted that we need to create, some excitement about. And Highway 85 is one of them, and maybe a couple along 37th, and that's how we start to differentiate ourselves. It's not like we can do some big branding project and go, look at us, we're this, because we are going to continue to be seen by most of the major retailing as a bedroom community. We help support what they do on 34. That's just the reality. I can't change that. You can't change that. But where we do have opportunity, we've got to do a better job of promoting it and telling the story about it.
So do you think that we need to change our vision of the city to make our story more tellable? Do you think that our vision is getting lost somewhere out there in translation to these, to these potential developers and these?
You're just not even on their radar screen. It's not even that they don't like the story or they haven't seen it. You're just not on their radar screen. So part of doing this work is to get us in position so that Allison and Jim have some things to go out to do. Part of what I do when I analyze is I pick up the phone and call those retailers. I can tell you exactly what King Soopers is thinking. So, and in doing so, I'm highlighting Evans to them. So, but when they say, well, what's that market really look like? What's my real opportunity? We have to have something built up that shows that. And it's got to be accurate, and it's got to be, in all honesty, I think I mean, we've talked about this before, and things haven't changed enough to change that perspective. I mean, there aren't great big retailing opportunities in the city of Evans. There just aren't. But that doesn't mean we don't have any opportunity. And I really think Highway 85 is an interesting conversation because, listen, I can't get you a grocery store on Highway 85. I just can't. I mean, that King Soopers that sits over there on 11th casts a really big shadow. Sorry. And no grocer really wants to come in on top of that, especially when it's constrained from a residential support perspective, right? But, okay, so you take that off the table, and that's disappointing for a moment, but then we look at what can we do on the corridor? What can it become, and what are the building blocks that make that happen? And that's really the key component. And there isn't I mean, I can't draw it for you today and say it's going to be all these things. I can just say we're going to create some building blocks on the corridor. We're going to do some physical improvements on the corridor that start to change the perspective, and then we're going to go out and tell the story. And then guys who, it won't just be one developer who shows up who's interested in redevelopment. It will be additional developers. We have to have some incremental success on the corridor. Mm-hmm. And part of that's our story, right? If you have some successes, you have a better story to tell. And so those are all the things that go into that element of it. And the worst thing we can do is hold out and think we're going to get a certain tier of retailing or a certain scale of retailing that we can't get. And you know what? That's what we're really going to talk about in 2 weeks is about what's real in terms of expectations. We're putting together trade area maps so you can really see what we have and how that matches up with the criteria that I've given you. And you know, if it's a question of yes but not now, then we have to maintain those opportunities. If it's a question of can we ever get it, and the answer is more than likely no, then we have to shift to, well, what can we do, and how do we do that in the best format possible, right? And all of those things start to build the story, and you know, the thing that matters to the private sector about how they view Evans. And you can, Evans is a wonderful community, and all those things that you listed about why it's a good community. You know, and I can tell you that I hear that out of every community, and that which means every retailer hears that about every community.
Right.
So what we have to do is build stories around the opportunities and show where we've put effort, where we have put money, where we have created vision, where we have shown patience, and where we are building blocks to get to something that has some meaning to the city.
Councilmember Deal, I saw your hand go up. We got about 3 more minutes.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Too wordy.
Sorry. Well, my perception is that in the almost 50 years that I've lived in Evans, they pushed specifically on the 85 corridor, they pushed retail out. They wanted to remain a bedroom community. They voted, or they discussed that back in 1980. Mr. Hedinger there as mayor, and that city council said they, you know, the majority of people in that time period wanted to remain a bedroom community. And he actually asked me what I thought of it, and I made asked him some questions specifically about, well, what about your children, things like that. And Evans extended barely to 23rd Avenue at that point in time. And I don't think the mobile home park there and the farm that's there were even in Evans at that point in time. Now in 96, when they expanded, then all that went out the window because they put up all the rooftops that the mayor at that time was very proud of having done. But that particular mayor, I found out later, was one of the ones who had opposed retail development. And me being a dumb person at that time, I didn't realize that you got to have that sales tax base to go ahead. The property tax just doesn't pay for everything. And I also would love to discuss, I travel a lot and I eat out a lot. I'd definitely like to discuss restaurants with you sometime.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation, isn't it? Yeah. It is not black and white.
But,
I challenge anybody to be a restaurant expert right now.
well, I can guarantee you that there are people for over 75 years or 100 years have been. The restaurant industry is one of the trickiest industries to.
It's also the place where a lot of independent opportunity lies. I mean, a lot of retailing is not really open to independents. I don't think people understand that as much. But the restaurant industry is one that's probably most dependent on independent operations. I mean, which makes it a really interesting category. And it used to just kind of get lumped in with, other forms of retailing, but now it's very much its own category of retailing and how we look at it.
And
Guys, I know, sorry, Fred, to cut you off. Katie's going to be back in 2 weeks. We do have another
Get your
item.
questions.
We do have another item we need to get to. So.
I told Jim you're welcome to email me if you've got a specific question or a thought and you want to have a conversation about it. I mean, my goal is to educate you. So, no question is too long, too difficult, too short, I'm happy to engage because this is how we all become better at what we're trying to accomplish here in Evans. And you're right, there are some predecessors. I've seen some pretty interesting plans and some pretty interesting regimes that have come out of Evans. And I think now at this juncture, we're probably the best, I would say, in position to try and make some real change.
I feel that way too.
Thank you. I
Thank you. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Okay, guys.
Thank
I'm
you.
leaving the candy. I gave up sugar, so really want those. I really want to eat those.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I'll see you in a couple weeks.
See you. Thank you so much for your time.
Appreciate it.
Next item on the agenda is the property tax comparative review from staff.
Thank you, Mayor. At a work session in December, the council requested information on our property tax rate and revenue, and the rate in finance parlance is our mill levy. And so what we have, Jackie just has some information to share tonight about our mill levy and our revenue, how we compare with some of the jurisdictions around us. I'm guessing, hopefully this answers council's questions, but this can also be the start to further conversation that council may wish to have. So with that, I'll turn over to Jackie.
Good evening, everyone. I feel like Councilmember Neal, you gave me a nice lead up of why this topic's important tonight, so we'll keep it rolling. We did do some comparison of how Evans relates to our neighboring communities, both in terms of general mill levy and any additional fire district mill levy that may be associated with these groups. I did try to focus on getting communities that were solely Weld County, so if you have a couple others that you're thinking, oh, why isn't that included? I tried to get as many as we could that were all Weld County. What you'll notice is we're certainly in the lower tier, lower half of these comparison groups, and we're certainly the lowest as it relates to the actual general mill levy just for the city. The ones on the left, you'll notice Fort Lupton, Milliken, Johnstown, the city mill levy there is 23, 25, 35. So very, very high. We are on a low end of the spectrum there.
Ours is 3.5.
Oh, sorry, it is pretty small. Yeah,
3.5.
3.536. And 15.5 is the current fire district for 19.036 is our current total. Have historically looked at a hypothetical scenario for Evans homes. So if we take an average $250,000 home in Evans, what that means is your property tax bill is somewhere around $1,700. The amount of money of that $1,700 bill that comes to the city of Evans is $63. So in monthly terms, $5.27 monthly of your property tax comes to the city. That's that yellow section of our pie chart. If we look at what the city does with those funds, all of that money, all of our property tax revenue does come into the general fund and pays for our general government services. The largest sector of what that pays for there in the dark blue is our police and public safety. So 36% of this year's budget of property tax revenue will be spent on police services. So about $1.89 per month will go to police.
From the average home.
From the average home, thank you. So that $5 monthly collection that we would receive. General government's about $1.63, and you can see some of the smaller components there. as they relate to our general fund budget. If we go back in time, in 2010, the city received about $1.7 million in property tax. Had a dip in 2011, came back up in 2012, and that's when voters approved the fire district branching out and forming their own fire protection district. So you'll notice in 2013, we dropped all the way down to $412,000. So 10 mils of the city's property tax at that point was given to the fire district to help them establish that district. And then you'll notice in those next 5 or so years, it remained in that like $4 to $5, high $500,000 level. We did experience some growth from 2018 to 2019 when we saw large increases in both production and prices of oil and gas. In the city, we did get property tax of a little over $1 million in 2019, which was great. We also had higher sales tax from that industrial sector during that time as well. As we know, with drilling reducing the last year or so and prices then coming back down, we saw just shy of $900,000 in property tax revenue this past year in 2020, and are expecting about $683,000 next year based on Weld County's updated property valuation. So we're seeing those numbers decline, and you may be asking yourself why. So this shows the valuation breakout. This is taxable valuation for the city. So on the left side in 2019, that total City of Evans taxable valuation was $254 million. Pretty cool to see those numbers. And what you'll notice, residential is that dark blue chunk, about 44% of that valuation was residential, and oil and gas made up 32%. Again, that's an increase in drilling. It's also based on valuation of infrastructure put in the city as well. In 2020, because on the prior graph, you saw that our projections are decreasing for what we will anticipate receiving this year. Oil and gas, that orange sector there, is dropping to 9% of our total valuation for next year. What that means is residential is paying not 44%, but 60% of the total property tax revenue that we're getting for this year. That property tax amount, $683,000 that we have budgeted for this year, represents 4.7% of the general fund's revenue budget. Sales tax that we're always looking at, a little less than half of all revenue coming in for the general fund next year. But again, in terms of relativity, that property tax amount, 4.7% of the general fund revenue. And then just to give some relativity terms, in the grand scheme of things, I found myself asking, okay, what does 1 mil even mean to the city? Just trying to get myself to understand that. If we were simply looking to increase the mill levy, just for discussion purposes, by 1 mil, that could mean additional revenue to the city of $196,000. Continuing that thought process, what would we need to do to achieve revenue of additional $500,000? Our mill levy would need to be increased by 2.55 mil. And then pushing it a little bit more, what could 5 mils then mean to the city? That could mean approximately $1 million of additional revenue. It would bring that city mill levy up to about 8.5 at that point. We would still be comparable in some of the neighboring communities we looked at on that first slide, just to kind of give you a picture of what that might look like and where we would be at that point. But I rambled quickly in the interest of time. Just wanted to kind of give this information back to council as you've requested, and open it back up for other thoughts that this may have sparked or additional information you may want from staff going forward.
I also want to, I do, great presentation, by the way. But what I do want to say is, I know that we give the fire district mills, and eventually we're going to not do that after some time. Did I understand that correctly? Like that eventually we're going to kind of wean them off of that. So at what point are we as a city going to do that? Have we kind of forecasted, when that will occur? Because that also will change the monies that we're receiving for the city. Because that will also be an impact and it'll be impactful. So,
We have an intergovernmental agreement that governs our financial relationship with the fire district. In short, we do not, there is, the mills that were transferred were permanent.
Oh, they were permanent,
There's no
okay.
plan or provision for those to come back to the city. The city's financial obligation to the fire district was for an amount from our general fund, and some of you who may have been around might be able to tell me, it was perhaps to compensate for some sales tax that the fire district would not have. But it's about $500,000 now, goes up by an inflation factor each year that the city is obligated to just give to the fire district as part of their total revenue. I will say that that IGA does have some language that would allow us, after a number of years, which this might be the time for that, to have a conversation with them about that long-term financial obligation and whether they need as much of our revenue as they receive, because that portion in the language of the IGA was intentional to help them get started, but that might not last forever. So
right,
that's
the conversation I was alluding to. Yes, so thank you. And I guess, having those conversations as well to really understand what that's going to look like. Because again, we kind of need to know in the scope of everything, in the grand scheme of things, what that will look like for the city as far as, increasing the levies or keeping the mill levies where they're at, and then maybe looking into those monies in the future and how that's going to play out. So I guess, just having more conversations in regards to how it all will transpire in the future.
Other comments or questions of staff? Tammy?
Just really quickly, for these increasing the mills and everything, the only thing I didn't see, and maybe you already have this, is how would that change the property taxes for everybody? Or would that change them? Would it be something you vote on? Just getting myself clear on all of this, because we did just have that 1 cent sales tax increase, which has really helped a lot with the roads. But how would it affect their personal property tax, things like that? Like, how much would it change?
You're right, we didn't calculate that. And so that's something I can come back to give some relativity to an average taxpayer, what that might mean. But it would be necessary to go to a vote of the people to increase that mill levy rate. And then,
fair to say, I shouldn't say things like this in meetings but I believe for most parts of Evans, the total mill levy, including all districts, is 60?
it's got to be close to
50 or 60 mills. And as this chart shows, the city gets a very small portion. So if we were to increase our mill levy by, say, 3 or 5 mills, then that, say, 60 mills, if that's what our total is, would go to 60 or 63. That gives you a percentage, of the relative impact of the total that would impact.
Well, and even that example, there's 95 when you have the school district.
Oh, great, yeah.
Yeah.
Couple more minutes. Other questions or comments?
But not in regards to this.
Not in regards. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
We got about 2 minutes for council discussion.
So we have we're going to be hosting the NPO meeting virtually next month. So, and also I got appointed to the finance committee of the NPO as well. So I'm both on the HR committee and the finance committee as well. So.
Congratulations. I do.
Excuse me, so you guys can hear me. So I just want to speak for myself in regards to what happened on January 6th. And I just want to say that personally that I don't condone the egregious insurrection that occurred at our nation's capital. And I believe that the treasonous breach was heartbreaking to see, and it was a mockery, and it was shameful to our republic. And I just feel that it's something that we definitely need to kind of address and let known. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anyone else have anything? Councilmember Neal?
Well, I couldn't calculate this in my head by the windmills, but if the mill levy was increased approximately 3%, or by 3 mills, according to the figures on that one chart, it would increase their property tax bill by about $51.
Well, yeah, so depending on your home value. If your home
Yeah.
value is about $150,000, it's roughly $300. give or take.
And yeah, this one's based on $250,000 value. I couldn't do that in my head. It's like,
Boom.
I don't do that
I did that a
calculation very often.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
And it's about that.
All right, well, let's get started in about 2 minutes.
It's like,
Boom.
I don't do that
I did that a
calculation
lot.
very often.